We are going to be recording this session for anybody who can't make it today. My name is Margaret Ferris. I'm the executive director here at Park, and it is my real pleasure to introduce one of our administrators, a subject matter expert, Heidi Scott Justo. I'm sure all of you have read her in the Spotlight. She's got a great column on writing and best practices, and she is sharing some of the topics that she teaches in her advanced writing techniques class. And if you are interested in pursuing that further, we've got a special discount code called Heidi10. Heidi10, that's Heidi10, ladies and gentlemen. And she will take questions at the end of her conversation. So make sure that you are thinking about things that you'd like to ask or like her to clarify. That would be fantastic. And Heidi, take it away.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And let's just give me a moment while I share my screen and get it changed over to presenter mode, or slideshow rather. And there we go. Can everybody see my screen? Can I get a head nod or something? Okay, thank you so much. So I am thrilled to be here today with you, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this webinar. I'm all about giving actionable tips that you can implement right away. So with that in mind, I have developed this presentation that'll cover 6 tips, some of which you'll be able to implement right here, right now. And then, of course, to nobody's surprise, there will be other things, of course, that you can be working on later, because writing is one of those things that you don't become an expert at overnight. It was Hemingway who said, we're all, I'm misquoting, but we're all apprentices in a craft where no one becomes master. So I strive myself to be a lifelong learner in this subject, even though I've been a writing consultant for over a dozen years. So let's get started. The areas we're going to cover, we're going to talk about creating a writing system and schedule, increasing your productivity, decreasing grammar errors. They happen to all of us, but we strive to eliminate as many as we can, and to improve your editing skills. And let's first, though, talk about why focus on writing. Why do I care so much about this? Why has Park set up a program dedicated solely for writing, not just resume writing or one particular type? It's because simply it's at the core of what we do as career services professionals. If we are writing or advising clients or job seekers, because I know not everybody is an entrepreneur like I am, but you're advising or writing these critical documents. You're communicating, if you are in practice for yourself or on behalf of an employer. We all write emails, right? Strong writing helps build our credibility, and poor writing skills can be a liability for us, and not just for us as individuals, but for everybody we work with and support. Because if we're presenting resumes, for instance, that are filled with writing errors, that doesn't bode well for our clients. And I became even more passionate about this topic as I was serving on the CPRW review committee. So I was one of the graders. I did that for a little over 4 years. And I saw that people are putting a lot of effort, a lot of time into these documents. And over again, I'm seeing errors that just don't warrant a passing score, because these are liabilities for the candidate. So that's why I care so much about writing, and it's fun. I proudly have my Oxford Comma Society coffee and tea mug. So the first tip relating to creating a writing system and schedule. First of all, big picture. appreciate just that writing has multiple stages and create processes for each stage. I do not recommend you just say, oh, today's a writing day. Well, writing for what? Right? Create it, and what are you asking yourself to do? So there are 4 key stages of the writing process. There's brainstorming, drafting, revising, and proofreading. Now, of course, we could break this out even further, because a lot of times we might be revising and then going in and there's some processes right in here, but big picture, and think about when you're creating your schedule and your projects, it's, well, when am I going to brainstorm? When am I going to draft? When will I revise? And then when will I proofread? So just remembering that they're just key steps within this whole process, and this is scalable. So it scales to the time you put, and we'll get into that in a minute here, really depends on the importance of the project. So what I'm suggesting here, so kind of creating a system and schedule. So if you think of that chart, how I just had the brainstorming, drafting, revising, and proofreading, if you're jotting notes down, or and I encourage you, make this a working session. If I'm saying things, you're like, oh yeah, I need to think about this, let me take notes, make it helpful for you. For me, I do a lot of, my brainstorming is often completely separate from drafting. I will schedule brainstorming sessions when I'm most creative, or I'll join in like writing groups where sometimes we meet virtually, and for an hour, all I'm doing is brainstorming. In 1 hour session though, this year, well, early last month, I brainstormed all of my blog topics for the year and all of my spotlight topics for the year. So this was dedicated time. I also have a journal. I write my ideas in the journal whenever I have them. So then I always have this bank of ideas to go to. Now, this could be for, well, what ideas? I do a lot of writing of articles. Of course, I write resumes. I'm also developing a course, a self-study course. So I have a separate sheet of paper of, well, what are just ideas when they pop into my head? What do I want to cover? I'm just jotting them down quickly. I also will schedule sessions with a contractor I work with, who she is my editor and proofreader, and she proofreads the resumes that I do, or a peer or a writing group. For me, I make sure I bypass self-criticism. There are no stupid ideas, right? Like, oh, is this done? No, just write it down, get it down on paper. And for me, and this may be different for you, but I use various helpful tools. So in the past, I've used whiteboards, super digitally savvy there. Lucid Spark is a digital platform for collaboration, and so is Freeform. So I'd encourage you, for each of these categories, just thinking, what is my system going to be? Drafting, what I can tell you is almost all of my mornings are drafting of client documents. I know by the time I hit the afternoon, I'm too tired, like for that intellectual energy of drafting a resume from scratch. So create systems and schedule things so then you're not wasting time, because you're like, well, I put it in my schedule that I'm going to work on this resume. I'm going to revise this resume from 4 to 5 this afternoon. When in fact, you're just so shot by then. The only thing you really have brain power left is more of that creative, like, I'm going to brainstorm ideas while I go outside for a walk. So really think about what works for you. And I encourage you, write this down. My second tip related to this is about scaling your time and effort according to the importance of the project. So more time and more effort goes into, and these are just examples, executive resumes, your website, right? You should probably put a lot of time and effort into that. a proposal for a game-changing opportunity. But less time and effort, maybe just a confirmation email received. I'm teaching a webinar. I'll review this afternoon and be in touch, right? There's still a, how am I going to respond? Draft it, look it over. Do I need to make any changes? Final read through. But that going through that writing process, those 4 steps is, takes this amount of time, where building a website from scratch might take this amount of time. So why I'm putting it like this is, don't let yourself get in the weeds too much and then go down, you're going down the rabbit hole, putting all this time and effort into something that isn't that important. So a visual, simple chart, right? A line chart, and this is scaling, 1 to 11. Assume normally it's a 10-point scale. I'd encourage you now, though, even take a moment, think about what opportunity or project would be an 11 on your 10-point scale. What is something that, and this may be something that comes around once a year, once every couple years, just knowing there will be a time where maybe I'm putting so much effort, right? But there's a time and place for that. Writing your 2,260-second resume probably doesn't require an 11. I'm not saying it doesn't require a lot of time and effort, but it probably isn't an 11. So this can help you keep perspective on how much time am I putting into each individual writing project, and helping you be productive that way. Related to productivity, use strategies that keep you focused. If you have never assessed what keeps you focused, then I urge you to do that today. Okay, so I know there are some things that I need. Okay, closing the internet browsers and silencing, I can speak, app notifications. So that's red, not because it's an error, but because it's that important and it's that difficult. Hey, I know everybody throws these things out. Well, close your internet browsers. That can be really difficult to do, especially if you're periodically checking information and looking it up. But that is a very helpful strategy. Work in a quiet environment or not. And I say it that way because I am the type of person who I can listen to focus music. I like that. YouTube, deep concentration music. I have that going a lot. If it's not that, then for me, it's going to be that I could hear a pin drop. My husband, on the other hand, my dear sweet husband of almost 18 years, has to have music like with words, which for me, I don't get anything done if someone is actually singing words. That will ruin my productivity like you wouldn't believe. So knowing what is helpful for you. Another thing for me is I need to have my desk clear. Some people can work and it's all cluttered around them. Me, I need this clear environment. You can also use time management techniques, these well-known ones. I have a picture of the Pomodoro technique. In short, this is you set a timer for 25 minutes, you work for that time, then you take a 3 to 4 minute break, and you repeat that cycle 3 to 4 times before you take a 15-minute break. I will use this technique sometimes when I'm really up against a deadline. I will even create a sense of urgency and do the Pomodoro method in kind of like sprints, where I will say, I'm setting the timer for 7 minutes. And in this 7 minutes, I am getting this amount drafted, right? And remember this, keeping you focused, also work according to the system you created for each stage. So for me, and this is my 10-year anniversary of running my business full time. When I draft resumes, I am not also copy editing or proofing. Okay, so I draft them, and of course, they're at a certain level of where I want them to be, but it's not in the drafting stage that I'm making sure, for instance, all of my date ranges, I'm using an N dash without space next to them, right? Or that all of that I want M dashes where they are versus where the N dashes. And those really little nitpicky proofreading things, that's a different system. So we can sometimes lose focus by focusing on the wrong things, and we're not achieving the stage of the writing that we're trying to. Okay, moving on from strategy and productivity, let's talk about the one that I'm sure most people at least dread, right? Grammar. So we want to strive for error-free writing. The only way to do this, and this is a longer process, increase your knowledge of grammar and style. You can use and learn from Grammarly, which if most people, I'm guessing, have heard of that, but if you haven't, it's an extension where you put it on your computer and it not only gives you corrections, but it also makes suggestions of why, right? Like, so it's teaching. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to what the error is it's pointing out. Microsoft Word editor is similar. That Word has really upped its game recently, in recent years, I'd say, in terms of when you run spell check in the editing, it subcategorizes based on grammar errors, punctuation conventions, conciseness. So if you go through that, that is something that you can always be using. So over time, if you're seeing like its suggestion I wrote be able to identify, and it suggested for conciseness, identify just as a verb, you're going to start slowly remembering those. And then you'll catch yourself, instead of writing those be able to, which, those weighing you down to be verbs, you're just going to start using stronger verbs. And then learn common grammar errors. My suggestion, and we're going to go through one as a sample, is if you scan this QR code, it will take you to a site through Stanford University. It's 20 common writing and grammar errors. This is something I learned about years and years ago when I worked at Duke University's writing studio there. And it remains what I consider a leading resource in terms of just being very practical and accessible. And it says for undergraduate writing, but my experience working with undergraduates years and years ago through best-selling book authors, because I do editing and ghostwriting for authors, is that these are the common errors, the most common errors. And I'd encourage you, put a thing in your calendar of once a week, maybe you're looking at the new, like number 2 on the list, number 3 on the list, and just kind of try to focus on that for that week of learning that error. Let's see. Okay, so number 1, decreasing grammar errors. So this is number 1 on the Stanford list, wrong word. And what I can tell you, what I see time and again, so much so that I'm not sure how important it is that most people don't know how to spell lead, but lead versus lead. Lead, LED, is I led the team. Lead, LEAD, is like lead, or actually graphite in a pencil. I see that all the time on resumes. Okay, the wrong word, the difference between insure, or assure. insure, right? With an I, think car, home, rental, so insurance policy. So if you've been writing, I will ensure I deliver your documents on time, that is ENSURE. The only time you use IN, associate that with your insurance agent, okay? Wrong words that I see frequently, affect and effect, okay? Affect or effect is the verb, effect, as in cause and effect, is the noun. Peak, so managed 58 projects simultaneously, which is from a resume that I worked on today. 58, no wonder she wants to leave her job. At peak, P-E-A-K, peak of the mountain, the top, right? Peak your interest is P-I-Q-U-E. I also will see it's versus its. So the IT apostrophe S, that is when you say, you could replace it is. Okay. Other examples, illusion or allusion. This, and a couple of these are from the Stanford site. Allergy versus allegory. Manger versus manager. Composed versus comprised. This last one, anytime I use either word, I'm always double checking because there's a subtle difference. Okay, so we also need to just kind of remember, well, what are some of the words that I get tripped up on? And if you're wondering, well, how do I know what I don't know? I really never knew that pique your interest is P-I-Q-U-E. I just didn't know. My tip is to increase your vocabulary just by reading. And see here, I had a little fun. Reading vociferously. Oops, no, wrong word. Voraciously. Okay, the more we read, the more our vocabulary increases. This is a thing of the long haul. You're not going to, hopefully by the end of the session, you'll go, oh yeah, wrong word. I do need to pay attention to that. Sometimes it's a proofreading error, like manger versus manager. Sometimes it's, ooh, I never thought about, am I using composed the right way, or should it be comprised? But this is where over time, just being aware, okay, I really want to make sure that I'm using the correct word. And sometimes the fancier words, I didn't have to say vociferous or voraciously, right? I could have just said by reading extensively. Okay, moving on. And I see too, there's a chat going on in the chat about ChatGPT. That is, we all need to be aware of it. I'm not too worried, but okay, improving your editing skills. Tip 5, clear, concrete advice here. Omit needless words. If you can say something in 3 words that you just said in 5, say it in 3. A lot of times, or frequently, the words that can be omitted are what would consider qualifiers, intensifiers, adverbs. These are words like actually, very, really, pretty, fairly, essentially, a lot. They get added into our writing, sometimes depending on the writing, because we're in conversation, we'll use these words. Oh, yeah, you're really pregnant. How are you doing? Okay, well, pregnancy is a state of being. You are or you're not. There's no really. We all know what the person means, right? Wow, like, you look like you're about to pop, but we don't need really. So these words we can often just completely remove. Remove the words very, really, essentially. See how it reads. Typically, it's going to read just fine without those words cluttering up the language. You may say, though, but I actually want to stress that I'm very excited. then my suggestion would be use a stronger single word. So if you find yourself, if you look at your writing and you have many very, really, all those types, then think of, well, how do I actually say this with a clearer, more precise word? So very excited, thrilled, really important, critical, a lot, many, walked slowly, right? Strolled. So being able to trim your words is important, of course, for a resume when you're trying to, or I argue every character space matters, not just every word, but literally every character space. But in other writing too, we just know that clearer writing tends to be concise. Oh, and I didn't say, I'm sorry, Strunk and White here. This book is, about 100 years old. There's updated versions. This is from William Strunk, and we also, the Strunk and White, the second author, it's called The Elements of Style. Okay, White as in E.B. White, the author of Charlotte's Web. This book is about 85 pages. It is one of those old but still relevant. Other writers, William Zinsser, who wrote On Writing Well, says writers should reread The Elements of Style once a year. Stephen King, in his memoir On Writing, says something to the effect of, most writing books are BS, except Strunk and White. Everyone should read Strunk and White. What I love about this from a functional standpoint is it's very thin. You can get it less than $10 on Amazon, and it's quick. It's set up kind of like reference style. So this isn't droning on and on and on in the big, dense, thick paragraphs, but very much a style guide. My last tip, and I already was talking about clarity and conciseness, omitting needless words is a key strategy. Another one, just overall focusing on that of in the larger the project, how this also scales. So do I need this whole paragraph? Does this whole topic that I'm bringing up add to the conversation, or add to the point I'm making? Yes or no? If not, when in doubt, throw it out. More sentence level, avoid wordy expressions. We'll use these so many times. A majority of, you can just write most. A small number of can be few. With regard to, regarding or about. The extent to which can be how much. I am in the receipt of, I received. At this point in time, now. Have a meeting, to meet. So these types of wordy expressions, what you'll be able to do is, and I see someone Claire put in the meeting chat, Grammarly catches a lot of these editing mistakes. Yeah, Grammarly a lot does, MS Editor will. And the importance is when those tools catch them, or when you catch them, is remembering, oh yeah, even sometimes it's just saying it to yourself. Instead of writing a majority of, I can write most. And over time, then you are not going to be using these types of wordy expressions. And then that will reduce the work you have to do when it comes time to edit your work. So how much editing you have to do is going to decrease the more you're able to just naturally draft with clarity and conciseness. In hedging language, we often will use hedging language without a strategic purpose. And I would urge you to be aware of when you're using hedging language and say, am I using this for a strategic purpose? You know, I will try to return your, I will try to reply in full by the end of the business day. Commit to it or not. I would encourage you decide, yes, I will reply by the end of the business day. Or if you're like, well, I'm really not sure, I am going to hedge because that's my goal, but I'm just not sure, then will try is fine. Other words like probably, potentially, seems. When I also do corporate training on professional writing, and I have reviewed, proposals or reports that are the final project to a client, and there will be unneeded hedging language. So be aware of it and use that when you want to, when you intend to, but not because you didn't ever think about it. Because if it's just in there, not intentionally, it's cluttering up the writing. And be a ruthless editor of your own work. Sometimes people have emotional attachments to their work. Say, but I worked really hard on this. And I say it with a smile on my face, but it doesn't matter if you worked really hard on it if it's not good. So put it in the parking lot. If you want, create a separate file called stuff cut from whatever, right? Whether that is a resume for a client. My dissertation, it was 6 or 7 chapters, 6 chapters with an intro and conclusion. And every chapter there, I have the final chapter and I have this whole other document, each one titled stuff cut from intro, stuff cut from chapter 1, because maybe you'll go back to it later. Maybe it serves another purpose. But if it's not serving you now in this writing, just get rid of it because it's weighing down the writing. We want to make sure your writing has clarity, conciseness, cohesion, coherence, and most of all, it's compelling. And a lot of those 5 C's, and I teach, and according to that methodology I've kind of developed, a lot of that really takes shape and comes into form in these final editing steps. And I could keep going on and on, but I know this is supposed to be kind of a brief action-packed session with these tips. So with that, I'll just say thank you. I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. I'm Heidi Scott Justo, PhD, and I'm happy to entertain any questions. And when I was talking, I saw the chat going, but I wasn't able to read everything. So if there are questions in there, I'm happy to respond to them as well.
Great, I'll help with that. So I'm going to scroll, but if you have any questions for Heidi, please type them in now. So at the beginning, there was a question about where can I find a resume editor?
So like, as it's somebody who only edits resumes and not writes them, Claire, do you mind expanding on that?
Yeah, somebody that just really focuses on the editing.
I would say maybe the starting place would be seeing if in the directory of the park directory, if people list their services, if they state resume editing, because the editing, and a lot of people talk about it just updating, is kind of a different service. Now, there are proofreaders who, my proofreader, she does proofreading, but if there's ever something that she reads through and she's like, this isn't clear to me, then she brings that up as well. So you could also be looking for, if you're thinking for your own practice, like an additional support person, looking at someone who offers the proof, maybe like proofreading plus. Would be an option. And if you're interested to learn who I work with, feel free to email me. I'm happy to pass along her information. I've worked with her for over 7 years.
Thanks.
Yes, I see Steve has his hand raised.
Yes, as far as finding someone to help you with their editing and working on your own editing, there are basically three types of editing. There's line editing, story editing, and copy editing. Copy editing is grammar and spelling. Story editing is putting your unity, coherence, your order. But line editing is saying things like the annual meeting was in the state of Georgia. You say the annual meeting was in Georgia, omitting needless words like you were talking about. While you're looking for other people, if you want to improve your writing, learn to line edit. That's a very important skill for resume writers, and just Google what is line editing tips, line editing techniques, and Strunk and White will elements of style will help you with that.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, and to kind of further that, editing is an interesting little field because there's other terms, you know, there's developmental editing, copy editing, line editing, technical, some people use words technical editing, proofreading. People come to me frequently, I just need this proofread, and it's full of errors, and it needs a lot more than just proofreading. So sometimes the words are, I guess, don't get overwhelmed if you're seeing like someone is saying copy editing, but this one looks a little different than, like, just the point is these terms can be loosey-goosey. So just line editing, I agree, is a great one to start. You can also be Google, if you see other terms, just you're not alone if you're reading descriptions and you're saying this sounds similar to this, and what's the difference here. In the American Freelancers Association, I believe, if I remember correctly, it's their site, they have a nice explanation of all the different types of editing. So another question.
Aaron asks, tenses in resume, are there exceptions to using present tense in a current role?
So I always, without seeing an example, I would say I always go with logic first and foremost. And I recognize that some people could may disagree, but I try to keep present items in the present and past actions or accomplishments in the past. And the easiest way to do that is if you have a separate, easiest for me, is if you have that like mini paragraph of responsibilities that is present tense, and then bulleted accomplishments that you have already done that are in past tense. Occasionally, there are exceptions to this because it's this past achievement that is also now an ongoing action or something weird like that. And my approach is typically, I always talk it through with the client and explain what the options are and things like that. But I tend to go with like letting logic prevail because I never want the reader to get confused.
Another question was, what do you think about the book, The Art of Brevity?
Oh, so I have a long list of books that are on my bookshelf, from some of the ones I've mentioned, to Sin and Syntax, to Don't Eat Grandma, Don't Shoot Grandma. I have not read The Art of Brevity. So when we're done here, I'm going to be looking that up, and I'm excited to hear that one.
And then the last question, pronouns on a resume, still a no?
Can I get clarity? Do you mean as in after a person's name, putting like she, her, hers, or they, them, or you mean like referring to my team? Yeah, Deborah's shaking her head. Again, not everybody will agree with this, but I will use them sometimes. I'd much rather, yeah, I know, I saw your response, Deborah. I will,
Okay.
yeah, I don't do it a lot. But if it is going to make the writing tighter and easier for somebody to read, like the human, because as you all know, I'm sure you read, you know, you're writing for the computer reader, the tracking systems, but also the human reader, I will use that if there's a compelling reason to. So not out of laziness or like, well, I just love how it sounds. But if there's a strategic, compelling reason, then I'm not, I don't have a problem with using like my once or so, twice in a resume. Yeah, I know, shocking for some.
And then, oh, we got another question. AP style was a standard at all my former companies. Is it true that neither Oxford or AP is a standard for resumes? Example, commas.
Oh, great question. So I'll try to keep this brief. So I do, my consulting firm is, let's say, boutique consulting firm. I work directly with all of my clients. Many of my clients have publication records. First and foremost, I see if they have a style that they always use and they are most accustomed to. I do that because, as we know, they have to tailor these resumes. And I want it to be as natural for them to do this without the chance of them introducing errors. So for instance, as much as it this is an overstatement, but as much as it kills me to write something and not use the Oxford comma, this client that I'm meeting with later today doesn't use the Oxford comma, so I'm not using it. I'm very much what's going to resonate best with the client. Now, there's another association that I know that recommends Greg's, GREGG, like style manual. My reference point has always been Chicago manual of style, so I tend to refer to that. For what it's worth, nobody like hate me, but I think as long as you're consistent within each document and you have consistent rules for yourself, it doesn't matter so much of like, well, I'm making sure that this is exactly according to this one style manual. I'm a huge fan of consistency within the document itself, but I can go any way in terms of, oh, I think it's important for this style or that style. I use APA, I use Chicago, and sometimes a combination when it makes sense. Not usually a combination, but I see too that Catherine asked a question, is curious if anyone's using any type of AI for writing. I am not. I had a meeting with a colleague where he said, I was playing around with chat GPT, CPT, the new thing that everybody's talking about. And he's like, I inputted the client information and he does like a intake form type thing, and he has notes, and he directed it to spit out information about each role. And he's like, I'm not using that, but it did a decent job and it helped me make sure I'm on track with what I'm planning to prioritize and use strategically. So I thought that was an interesting use of it. I don't think that AI is going to be tough, my view, to pick up on the subtleties, right? Because we all know what it looks like just to generate a resume, like with you have all probably, or some of you probably worked with people where like they say, I worked with X company. I'm not even sure if I was working with a real person. It felt like it was a robot. And when it feels like you're working with a robot, the output is a resume that has lots of keywords. Sure, there's accomplishments, but the layer, what Steve was saying about like the storytelling part of it that should be subtly woven in there, I find it's not quite there yet. So that's my comment on the AI for writing. Any other questions?
None are coming in.
Okay.
Well, Heidi,
Wow.
thank you so much for your time today. It was a great presentation, and I could tell people were very much enjoying it. So thank you to all who attended. The
Thank you.
recording will be up on the video in the video library within a week or so. So if you'd like to revisit, it'll be there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. Thanks for the questions, engagement, and contributions. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Doctor, so much. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge. I do.